In his letter to the Romans, Paul states in chapter 12, verse 2, not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Transformation involves change. We're in a time of rapid change impacting nearly every aspect of our lives, so much so that the amount of change that's happening can sometimes even be overwhelming. So how do you lead yourself through change, and how do you lead a congregation through change? What tools are there available for you to help lead through change? Well, we're going to talk about those questions and more in today's episode of the Sawtooth Podcast, Leadership on the Ledge. Thank you for joining us today. I am joined by our co-host, Dr. Matthew Marine, and myself, Donald Moore. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Matthew, how's things going?
Things are going fantastic. I think when you talk about change, that is an understatement right now.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people in our congregations and in our society have probably had a lot of change fatigue. Mm-hmm. They're tired of change, and so much has changed. So I think this is a really relevant conversation for us today.
Yeah, I would agree. And before I get too far along, he's behind the camera, but he's everyone's favorite tech guru, editor, and producer, Tyler King. Tyler, why don't you say hi?
Hi.
Thank you, Tyler. Once again, it's hard to get him to settle down so we can actually get into the podcast. But he managed, we've got him there now, anyway.
I like the awkward hi at the end of that conversation. So I like how we do that. It's a good tradition we have.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so in today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about individual change and how change impacts an individual. And we're going to talk about a model that's out there. Now, it's a business model, but a model that's out there to take an organization through change. Again, we're about equipping our followers with some tools, and so that's what we're planning to do today. And then in the next episode, we're going to talk about change in a different form, and that is, it's a little bit more personal.
Yeah.
About leading the church through change. And we'll have a different reference for you when we go through that as well.
I think that's what is really helpful with the models, Don, is change is so emotionally charged that when you're in the middle of change, you're allowing your emotions to drive your decisions. Mm-hmm. When you have a model, you almost have a step-by-step practice that allows you to process change without becoming so reactionary to change. So I think that's why these models are helpful, and that's why we want to share them today, to give people the tools to move away from the emotional aspect of change into kind of more a stronger leadership style.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And so what we're going to first talk about is kind of at the personal level. And what we're going to reference is the change cycle. It's how people can survive and thrive in organizational change. It's a practical guide to navigate the 6 stages of change, and it's by Ann Salerno and Lily Brock. They're what I termed my change consultants.
Yeah.
So they've got a model that you apply at the individual level to go through change, help you understand what change is doing to you, and help you move through the change at the individual level, and not just move through it to survive it, but actually to look for the opportunity in it so that you can thrive.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to talk about here. Keep in mind that different personality types will impact how you process change. I think you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, really everybody has a style of change or a style of leadership based on their personality. Probably the most well-known personality test is what people call the DISC. You have kind of dominating, influence, sensitive, and then maybe concern. And it's fascinating, Don, that most congregations put in sensitive, caring elders who are really relationally driven. So when change happens, a lot of times once the process of change starts to take place and then people react to that change negatively, because the leadership is so relationally focused, they give up on the change and then they just go back to kind of how it was always be.
Okay, yeah. I think it's also important to note that everybody will go through change
Yes.
at a different pace.
Yeah.
And that's something to keep in mind. And your leaders, since they're the ones that might actually encounter the change earlier
Yeah.
than others, there's a very good chance that they're actually going to be a little bit further along in these 6 stages than those that they are leading. So let's look real quick at the 6 stages of the change cycle. Stage 1 is loss. So why don't you talk a little bit and let our followers know what we mean by that? What do we mean by loss?
Well, it could be as simple as you don't do that practice anymore. So
Okay.
you may have had a ministry in the congregation and that ministry ceased to exist. And they feel that. That's something that was very valuable to them. And so when things change, usually there's a sense of loss because it's not going to be the way it once was.
Yeah, and depending on when our followers listen to this, they could be experiencing and still experiencing and have gone through the loss based off of restrictions, put on everybody due to COVID. All right, and the exit strategy for that, I think this is important. It's important to ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen to me?
Yeah.
As a result of this change. And then the idea is to kind of create for yourself kind of a safe space to start processing the change, which then takes you to stage 2, which is doubt. So Matthew, what do we mean by doubt?
It's the letter from a member of the congregation that says, and it's sincere, it is in a place of love, and they're just worried that it's just not going to work.
Okay. That the change is not going to work.
I know you guys want the very best. I know that you have prayed about this, but it's just not going to work. And they're just doting. And we even dote ourselves when we make a change. Can I do this? And so that's kind of the stage of doubt.
So in the stage of loss, we start generating a lot of questions. We have an absence of information.
Yeah.
So we want to answer those questions. It's in the stage of doubt that we start to gather the facts and answer those questions for ourselves.
Yeah.
When we can get some answers for those questions, then it'll take us to stage 3, which is discomfort.
Before we move to stage 3, what typically happens in a congregation is that we fight about the stage of doubt.
Okay.
So what takes place is somebody sincerely questions, will that work? And then leadership or you in that change then debates with them on whether it will work or not. And if you lead that way, now you just got to fight. Instead of empathizing the loss, listening to the doubt, and moving on. Don't make it a fight. Just listen and empathize.
Yeah, because we're not making additional decisions. We're just gathering facts.
Yeah.
So we really shouldn't argue about the facts.
No.
But that then takes us to the discomfort stage.
Yes.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit? What do we mean?
You're kind of in between. You're in no man's land where it's not new. You haven't learned that new skill. You still have a bit of longing for the past and yesterday.
The good old days.
Yes, it's even like the Egyptians or the Israelites who leave Egypt. They sit back and they're mad at Moses saying, give us back our melons. They forgot about the bricks. They're in that discomfort, and so they're just longing for stability.
Okay. And we have a saying, you need to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And it's in the discomfort stage where that takes place. So we kind of focus on coming up with the motivation for ourselves to keep moving, and then we go to stage 4, which is discovery. So let's tell our followers a little bit about the stage 4.
It's the ability at that level to actually look at the situation.
Okay.
Will this work? Will it not work? Let's at least try it.
Okay.
And there's some flexibility in moving forward.
All right, and so we begin to move forward, which then takes us to stage 5. Actually, it's not that we begin to move forward. We're already moving forward. But now we're making decisions that kind of reflect our ability to see the best options,
Yes.
not the worst options.
In change, and anytime change happens, it's always resisted.
Yes.
So typically people look for all of the negative reasons why it won't work. In this stage, in understanding, now they can look at, maybe this won't work, but they can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they start to understand that, wait, there's some good that can come from this as well.
Okay, so change has happened. I've gone through stage 1, that sense of loss, because that it's created some loss in my life somewhere, somehow.
Yeah.
Something that I am used to, it's no longer there. And then I've moved on to the stage of doubt. What does this mean for me? I need to start gathering facts because I got a ton of questions. And then I move on to the stage of discomfort. Okay, I've got some answers. I'm not sure I'm bought into these answers, but I've got some answers, and I got to keep moving forward. Then we go to discovery, making those decisions that are the best options, understanding, identifying the benefits so that we can begin to integrate into the change, and then finally, stage 6, which is, in fact, integration.
Yes.
So talk about integration.
Integration is you brush your teeth because that's what you do every day. And now you have changed to such a point that the change is now the new normal. And you just accept it as it is. It's almost like a sense of acceptance. It's part of your natural part of your life.
And I think it's key when you get to this stage, that's when you're really at your best at being able to help others move through whatever stage they're at, whether they be, all the way back at stage 1 or whether they're just one stage behind you.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, it's circular.
Yes.
It's circular. Okay, so that is kind of at the individual level how I'm going to process some change, the stages that I'm going to go through in order to accept, embrace, and then start to do the change, whatever that change is. So now let's look at kind of a model that's used, and we'll be able to refer back as we look at this model to some of the stages of the change cycle. But there's a model out there, and it's called ADKAR. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not have heard of it. But ADKAR is an acronym for a change model.
Yeah.
It states that its focus is on the people side of change. It's based on 20 years of research, and each letter stands for a different phase of change in the process that is designed to take you from the current state through a transitional state to a future state.
Yep.
So the first one, in the A in ADKAR, the first A is awareness. So awareness of the need for change, the reason for the change.
Yeah.
And so awareness is the goal of early communication related to the change. You want to talk about that real quick?
It's just the need for it, for people to identify it. And sometimes people just don't see it. A leader sees the need for change, and a lot of times people just accept the current status quo, and they don't think about what it could be or how it could be better. And so awareness is just allowing people to understand that what is happening now can be improved.
Okay, great. I like to think of this particular stage where you cannot over-communicate.
Yeah.
At this point, you've got to communicate, and then when you think you've communicated enough, you're just getting started communicating, and you need to communicate more.
Well, if you apply it to a congregational situation, so what happens is a preacher could get up and say, we're going to do this totally different. And everybody is essentially hearing that for the very first time. Yeah. And the leadership may have processed it for 6 months to 2 years. Mm-hmm. They have dealt with the change, and then it's automatically announced, and then an ultimatum ultimately happens. And you hear this in church literature. If you don't like it, you can always leave.
Right.
That's not change.
No.
That's called being a dictator. And you haven't created any awareness, and people weren't able to kind of process it, and now you're giving them an ultimatum. It's not creating awareness.
Yeah.
It's creating an ultimatum.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And sometimes when we communicate that change, we make people think that there's a problem. There may not be a problem.
Yeah.
Sometimes change is just improvement on something that's working okay. We want it to work better.
Yeah.
So that's awareness, and it kind of ties in with stage 1 where there's some loss.
Yes.
Involved at the personal level. Once you've made me aware that there's going to be a change, then stage 1, there's going to be some loss.
Yeah.
All right, moving on then to the D in ADKAR, that's desire. That's a desire to support the change. So remember, creating in individuals a desire to support the change. Some keys there, some keys to consider is, what's in it for everybody as far as the change goes. It's also key to get some early adopters.
Yes.
So why don't you talk real quick about some early adopters? What do we mean by that?
These are people who embrace change.
Okay.
You're always going to have a spectrum, and you're going to have some people that if you say change, they say, let's do it. And then other people, if you say change, they're against it 100% of the time for the rest of time. And if you're a congregational leader and you are building a consensus model in your leadership, that means you have to get everybody on board before you can have change. Nothing's ever going to change because you're always going to have some people who resist. But good leadership is in creating that desire. You have to talk about what is good for them. So sometimes leaders talk about, well, this change is going to be good for us. Nobody wants to hear that.
Okay.
People want to hear about how this is going to affect me.
All right.
And you have to communicate it in such a way that they understand what benefit is going to be given to them.
And if I haven't created the desire, then what I'm doing is I'm creating resistance.
Yes.
Which is horrible. And then and that resistance will kind of manifest itself in either passive or aggressive behavior, which ties back to stage 2, the doubt stage.
Yeah.
Of individual change within the change cycle. So that's the A and the D. Now the K, knowledge. We need to provide folks the knowledge of how to change.
Yeah.
So to summarize, really, and this was probably the easiest of every one of these steps, and that is training and coaching people in what the change is going to be. And then we move on to ability, the second A in ADKAR. So the ability to demonstrate those skills and behaviors, the outcome of additional training and coaching to achieve the desired effect. And that's something that ties in with stage 3, the discomfort stage, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, and stage 4 as well, which is the discovery stage. Again, making decisions based off of what I see as the best options.
Yeah.
All right. And then finally, reinforcement. So the R in ADKAR, reinforcement. And that's to make the change stick, measuring how well we're executing the change within the future state. And that ties to stage 5, understanding, stage 6, integration within the change cycle. I'd like to sit on reinforcement for just a second. I think you got some comments about reinforcement.
Well, you have to do something, and they say to create a new habit in 21 days in a row.
Okay.
And if you are in a congregation, you're probably not going to do it 21 days in a row, but if you allow people to sabotage this, you're not going to reinforce the change, and then they're not going to gain the confidence with the new skill. And then you can allow them to feel that they are improving, that this is going well. And if you don't reinforce through positivity and kind of praise, where you champion somebody in the congregation, you see somebody make that change, you see them practicing that change.
Okay.
If you don't retell that story, people don't get that this is what we're looking for. And I think that's a really positive way to do that in a congregation.
And we need to make sure everybody keeps in mind that if you're leading through change, there's resistance the whole way. Every one of these stages, there's some kind of resistance. Now, it may be more or less depending on where you're at and how well things are going, but that resistance is there. And if you don't reinforce it, all we've done is we've created a fad that's going to go away.
Yeah.
We have not created change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or embraced change or adapted to change.
Yeah.
All right, so we're running short on time. Matthew, how about giving some examples where maybe we've experienced this both personally and as a group? You've been a minister for many years, so why don't you share some of that?
A good example of this is when we stopped doing Sunday nights.
Okay.
And we moved to small groups, or what we call H2H groups.
Okay. For house to house.
For house to house. And I remember when we originally announced this and we created the awareness, we had a class on this, we communicated it, and then we created the whole program. We talked about what it would look like. So we did all kind of some of the ADKAR stuff. And it was fascinating, the responses. We got some responses of, if you do this, we will leave. And you always get the threat.
Right.
Anytime there's a change in the church, you're almost always going to have somebody to say, if you do this, we will leave. They did not leave. A lot of times it's just a threat. Then there was the desire to keep the things as a norm. And so we had a group that says, well, this is fine as long as you have a group meeting at the building. Mm-hmm. And so we thought that was good compromise. We can have a group at the meeting. But after probably 6-7 years of doing this now, we don't have a group meeting at the building because it ultimately died off. Because people didn't really want that.
Right.
It was more just kind of going back to the old solutions, to the old ideas.
Well, and they saw the benefits of the change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they started to buy in.
Yep.
And then it was reinforced. And it was funny, some of the biggest resistors to the small groups and not having it at the building were the people who finally said, I don't want to come to the building anymore. I want to be in a house.
Yeah.
Because that was where the real spiritual growth was happening. And then we marked it too, where we had about 40 people coming on Sunday, and then we get 120 people. And people saw that was making more of an impact for spiritual good than just coming to the building with 40 people. It served more people, and they could see the benefit of it. So anytime you have change, it's just a process, and sometimes it's predictable as well as unpredictable. So.
Yeah, and we just want to emphasize, we're not talking about change in theology. Or, we're talking a little bit, for us it was Sunday night and a change in the method, but that was it.
Don, I changed from wearing a tie and not wearing a tie.
Yes.
And I saw all of this, and I remember warning people that I may come to church and not wear a tie one Sunday. And I had people saying, man, I really like that tie. And then when I did wear it, and I would wear it sometimes and not wear it, and I had people coming to me at the end of services saying, I really like it when you wear that tie. And I had the weeks I didn't wear a tie, I really like it. Now both of them are trying to let me know where they're at.
Yep.
My job was to make a decision and just lead. It can be big or simple, but we're not talking about theology here. We're talking about the practice.
Kind of some things that impact the life of your church. And how to lead through those changes, whether they're changes that are generated within the congregation or forced upon you. All right, so that's it for this particular episode. Our next episode, we're going to look at the application of these two models. So if you want some homework, you can read Canoeing the Mountains by Todd Bolsinger. And Matthew, anything for our followers that maybe that they should know about the book, or next week before we move on?
Buy it, read it.
Okay, there you go. It's a good book. Until then, we want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Leading on the Ledge, Leading Through Change, and the Sawtooth Podcast, Leading on the Ledge, Leading Through Change in this particular case. And we look forward to seeing you at our next episode. Have a great day.